to our May edition of Fabulous Friday. I love seeing a bunch of faces that I haven't seen before. So my name is Lena Cordia. I am the Community Engagement Director here at the Buffalo County Historical Society and Trails and Rails Museum. I'm just going to give everyone a couple of updates about what's happening at the museum before we begin today's presentation. We are just now opening our two new exhibits. The one that you can see here kind of as a border is Traveling from Texas. It's called Vaquero, the Genesis of the Texas Cowboy, and it is featuring photographs from the Bob Whitliff collection at the University of Texas San Marcos, I believe. We also have an exhibit to the other side of that that was based on local history, Buffalo County Rodeo. It is a little Kearney focused, so we're asking people who know about some rodeo outside of Kearney in Buffalo County to share what they know with us. So I think some of you may have some information we'd be interested in. And that was curated by one of our student interns, Joey Colanino. He'll be here after today's program too if anybody wants to see the face behind the exhibit. All of these will be on display. They're free until June 15th. And then we also have a bingo contest with images from that exhibit if you're interested in winning a free Trails and Rails t-shirt in the color of your choice. What else have we got going on? There's a lot. We have some brochures and some flyers along the back wall there with our calendar of events. We're about to start our summer season, so we will have a lot of events going on. And next month, we will continue our Fabulous Friday programs as well. And we're going to have Lyle Henderson here talking about saddle making. So very fitting with our exhibits.
And if they saw the sign on the door that says we're closed today, that's because we've had
500
fourth graders here the last 2 weeks.
Wow. So now that that's done, we're so happy to introduce adults back into our space. And with that, I will pass it off to Vicki Bissell. She is in charge of our Fabulous Friday committee.
Yes.
Thank you, Vicki.
And today we're very happy to have Valerie Vierk.
Yes.
Did I get it? Close?
Yeah, good.
Here, who is going to be talking about her grandfather, who is John Pesek. And she's going to tell us all about his days of wrestling and his days with his greyhounds. And as you can see, she's brought things to see.
Very tippy, so.
So, Valerie?
Thank you very much. Yeah. I'm plugged in. Thank you all for coming. My goodness, I'm humbled by the crowd. I hope I don't get stage struck. Thank you to the Ravenna contingent and everyone else. Well, I have so much to say, and we'll get started. When I talk about people, I like to kind of know where they came from. John was, we used to call them Bohemians, now we call them Czechs. He was born 9 miles south of Ravenna, 1894. Fifth child of Martin and Anna Pesek. John's father, Martin, was born in southern Bohemia in November 1864. His youngest child. Martin's parents were Albert and Rosa. In 1867, Martin's parents, along with his sister, immigrated to America and settled near Tama, Iowa. In 1882, the family moved to Schneider Township, south Ravenna, and Albert bought 160 acres from the UP Railroad. John's mother, Anna Rosichka, was born in Kaslov County, Bohemia in 1863. In May 1882, she and her family came to America and settled in Gardner Township, which is right next door to Schneider. They may have met at one of the dances in their area. They were married here in Kearney in June 1883. 7 children eventually were born to this marriage. Anastasia, Americanized to Daisy, Frank, Albert, Emma, John, and twins Hubert and Charlie. We know how difficult life was on the prairie, for farmers especially, so I won't have to belabor that. When the threshing crews were assembled, sometimes the young men would start wrestling, and John quickly rose to the top of the heap in that. He and his siblings attended District 39, close to their home. John dropped out of school at about 8. Years later, John's teacher told his family. John politely would say, "I'll be going now." and climb out the window. He was very polite about it. Still, he learned to read and write and had a keen intellect. Tragedy strikes on May 29th. John was home alone. I never knew anything about this till he was gone. He told the story to Mom. I figured it was a Sunday and everybody was visiting because he was home alone. But checking the dates, it was a Thursday, so I have no idea where everybody was. He was sitting in the kitchen and all of a sudden the stovepipe just sucked up. Next thing you knew, he was sucked up and out of the house. The Ravenna News carried the story and they said one of the Pesek boys was tossed around and was found a considerable distance, whatever that means, I don't know. 3 or 4 of their homesteads suffered damage, but the Pesek homestead was completely destroyed. After the cyclone passed, the family went out and salvaged what they could of their possessions, including pillowcases that were hanging in the trees. The oldest daughter, Anastasia, called Daisy, was living with her husband a few miles away, and I suppose the homeless family spent the night there. They also Anna had relatives north of town. She had a sister closer. About 2 weeks later, Martin drove a wagon to Ravenna, 9 miles north, to get lumber to rebuild the house. He reportedly left Ravenna late that afternoon. In those days before daylight savings time, darkness would have overtaken him about 9 p.m., and it was hilly going through those hills. Sometime in the evening, Anna heard a noise in the distance and thought Martin was returning. But when he didn't appear, she thought she had been mistaken. A couple hours later, a neighbor came and said they'd found Martin in the road. The lumber had shifted and he was dead. So now Anna was left alone with 4 children still at home. Emma, 14, almost 15, John, 12, and the twins, 9 and a half. 3 older children were living on nearby farms. The following photo is believed to be taken at the funeral. My cousin Jeff started doing a lot of research in the 90s on the family and uncovered stuff we had no idea. One of our relatives here, his cousin Marietta, provided us with this picture. Martin was 42. He's buried at St. Wenceslas Bohemian Cemetery, south of Ravenna, just a mile or so from where he lived. He was a member of the Woodmen of the World fraternal organization. They paid for his funeral. With Martin gone, the 3 youngest Pesek boys became very rambunctious. Martin kept them pretty well in line, I understand, but when he was gone, Anna couldn't handle him. One time they were wrestling in the kitchen when Anna was away and broke the stove, damaged it. They tried to fix it, but their mother quickly spotted the damage. When John was a mid-teen, weighing about 160 pounds, this is John from the big picture. My brother said he's got those cold little blue eyes. He had blue eyes. Here's Anna and little Hubert here. Looks like he's been crying, and that's little Charlie. A few years later, Charlie was in a farming accident. He was playing in the tall grass or something. The oldest boy, Frank, had the sickle blade, and the little boy was going to jump up and scare him, and he misjudged, and it caught him on the heel. John told my mother later that, I don't know if there weren't crutches or what, but he would get around on his all fours and hold that little injured leg up. Somehow he didn't get infection, and Charlie grew up to be a pretty good wrestler, but they were much smaller than John. Okay, yeah, we already said that. I got a little bit ahead of myself. John's first, the Yankee Robinson Circus would come to Ravenna, and that was always a big deal. Well, one of these circus acrobats kind of took an interest in John and saw John trying to do some tricks or something for the crowd. And he showed John how to walk on his hands, do handsprings, flips, and hand and head balances. He predicted John would make a good acrobat. The brief training would come in handy for John in the future. John's first public wrestling match was in 1912. against William Hosek in an upstairs gym in downtown Ravenna. John won a two-fall contest. Hosek was 4 years older and a good baseball player. The next match was on April 13th with Dutch Thiessen, a professional local baseball player and all-around athlete. The match ended in a draw when each man had secured a fall and they were winded and agreed to quit. In early 1915, Clarence Eklund, the light heavyweight Canadian champion, had heard about John and wanted to see what he was all about. He posted a challenge in the Ravenna News and John accepted. Eklund was 8 years older than John and a seasoned wrestler. The match took place in September 1915 at the Fireman's Picnic held at Scotch Bowls Grove outside of Ravenna. Eklund finally pinned John after 45 minutes of hard work. They rested for 10 minutes and then resumed. After 30 minutes, by mutual consent, the men decided to end the match. Later, Eklund said he'd never seen or wrestled an amateur of John's ability. Clarence trained and coached John on wrestling holds on and off for the next 2 years. They would remain lifelong friends, and John always credited Eklund with helping him learn about wrestling. And John would train by, my cousin Jeff wrote a book on John in 2013. If anybody's interested, he has 4 copies. I don't have them here, but email. Jeff's got a picture of John hanging by his neck. He was always developing these neck muscles because it was important for wrestlers. But he hooked himself up to a disc or something and just pulled it. He trained all his life. John obtained a manager from Shelton, Martin Slattery, who had seen John wrestle in the Eklund match. Slattery lined up several matches in Shelton for John, whose star was rapidly rising. Shelton tried to claim John, but John quickly set him straight that he was from Ravenna. Here he is in 1915. 1917. And they did this. I can't believe this. I was researching literally yesterday. They said he had a 13-inch chest. I'm like, huh? That doesn't sound right. But he was deliberately said he could expand his chest, so that's what he's doing there. You can see his neck, and he had big, strong hands. This is my favorite picture, John. We don't know the date. Anybody want to tell me how old they think he is? I said 1920, which would make him 26. But anyway, I like it because of his hands. Here's another muscle shot. Okay, now here's my second favorite picture. This appeared in the Shelton paper in like 1984. We'd never seen it. Here he is up at Gordon, Nebraska. It was a big deal. The Stockman's Convention, 3-day affair of various activities, and they knew how to put on a show like we did, sort of like we do with our Annie-Bar. He was scheduled to wrestle Władysław Zabisco, well-known Polish champion who had just lost to Ed Strangler Lewis the week before. Strangler was the champ for a long time. I'm gonna call him Zibby because I have trouble with his last name. Zibby was about the same height as John, but he had massive arms, shoulders, and chest. Here's Zibby. The day before the match, John rode on a float covered with the American flag, and I'd love to have a picture of that, but don't have it. The ring was set up in a circus tent and could accommodate 4,000 people. When the wrestlers were to be introduced, John and his manager came into the ring, but Zibby did not appear. After about 10 minutes, John got annoyed and walked off, which he should have. Finally, Zibby appeared and strutted around the ring, flexing his muscles and sneering, attempting to intimidate his smaller adversary. Zibby outweighed John by 35 pounds. John almost always, his early wrestling weight was like 185, and then he was a lot of times 200, but usually the guys were bigger. Later I read where some big champion from Europe saw John and he called him the toy wrestler because he looked so small. Well, when John was done with him, they said he went back to Europe and they never saw him again. So anyway, they started the match. After 2 hours and 3 minutes of wrestling, John picked up Zibby and slammed him onto the mat. Zibby was stunned and John threw a head scissors and double wrist lock and forced Zibby's shoulders to the mat. The ref tapped John on the shoulder, signaling he had won, and then raised his arm. The crowd went crazy and roared their approval of John. After this match, big-name promoters started noticing John, and he entered the League of the Big Time. There's another one. I'm not sure if that was taken the same day as the one with the hands. I tried to compare the collars. But to me, he looks a little older here. So these are, like I said, we don't know the dates for sure. He went out to San Francisco and caused a sensation out west. This is a famous car running over him, and there were, I guess, there's two pictures. I'm not sure if this is the one in San Francisco. There were like 5 people in it. And John said later, well, it took him a while to take that picture, so that car was on me quite a while. And it was in front of some post office, and people were calling the cops and saying they're running over some guy out here. And I guess they had a video, and he was supposed to jump up after this went over him so it wouldn't look fakey, and he kept forgetting to do that, so they did it a couple times. And I got an original in an oval frame a gal just gave me 4 years ago. Okay, now we're we're about 1919. John wrestled this Jim Londos, and I got my slides kind of out of order. Later, I'll show you a picture. The Golden Greek, he was very easy on the eyes too. They wrestled in Shelton. There were a lot of wrestling matches in Shelton at the beginning. And Londos was disqualified for rough tactics, and he thought Pesek had been rough too, and now he had a score to settle. So this match was in Omaha and ended about 1 a.m. with Londos wobbly and unable to continue. Thus, John was declared the winner. He slept for 2 hours, caught an early train to Ravenna, because it was the big homecoming for the soldiers and sailors. The war was over, as we know, in November 1918, but they delayed it a year so the boys could all get home. So this is the big celebration, 3 days, and he wrestled Charlie Peters and beat him. They were kind of worried that he'd be too tired after this match, but he did fine. The weather had turned cold, it was October, and so the match was supposed to be in the ball field, but they moved it into the pastime theater. And he beat Charlie Peters in 2 straight falls in about 30 minutes each. Peters weighed 210 to John's 190. Peters was considered pretty successful earlier. After the match, John attended the dance on the 2nd floor of the Opera House, later called the Big Onion. Probably remember that, some of you. A tall, quiet, dark-haired 19-year-old Merle Mahoney may have danced with John. Okay. This is a little out of order. When he was in California in 1920, he met Jack Dempsey at a gym. They were both training. This is later. This is a late breaking. I think this is 15 years later. You can tell John Dempsey doesn't look that old. They were about the same age, but I think this was in the 30s, so I'm a little out of order. Okay, here's the Valentine's wedding. There's John and Grandma. We never called John Grandpa. He was always John. And Grandma, her little nickname was Muggie, M-U-G-G-I-E. Her kids called her that. She signed her cards Muggie. Her name was Merle. She was very quiet, very tall for a woman that age, 5'10", brown eyes, polar opposites. It's a beautiful picture of Liz. Was born 10 months after the wedding, December. She was so happy when she saw Liz. She had the little pointed nose like John. She was just so thrilled. And here we jump a few years. This is Annie Barr. You can see the matched greyhounds there. 2 of the kids were in the back. We're not sure of the date, but they said the kids were 3 and 4, so that's on like a postcard. I love that picture. And Grandma's on the far right. Here's John. I'm not sure the date, but he looks pretty young there. Rudolph Valentino garb. So this was a big deal. Yeah, first I need to describe the trust. In the early years, like 1920, maybe before, there were promoters and the managers in the East who pretty much controlled wrestling, and they had their stable of wrestlers that they told them what to do and blah blah blah. And of course, John didn't want to do that. He wanted to play for keeps. So, but after, and I just realized this 2 days ago, February 17th, 1921, 3 days after they're married, he's wrestling Strangler Lewis, who got the name, some French people, they called it a sleeper hold, and the people thought he was strangling him, so that nickname stuck. But anyway, John wrestled him, and Lewis was built like a bull and much more experienced, and they asked John, we can declare the headlock illegal if you want us to. And he said, no, I don't want Strangler to say he beat me or I beat him because he couldn't do his signature hold. So it was allowed, Kansas City. John broke the first headlock and the crowd went crazy. Lewis eventually wins, but praises John and predicts that if he keeps going the way he is, he will be a champion in a couple of years. Ex-world champ Joe Stecker says, Pesek is a terrible man to handle because of his tremendous strength. And I saw my son little kid boxing, and it really upset me. I can't imagine the new bride, because they had to carry John to his corner. It was pretty brutal. He lost, but they praised him. She was with him. I'm sure she was with him. I'm sure she was at the match. I can't imagine her not going to this big match. And I thought, that would have been bad for John, for his new bride to see him get beat like that, but that's the way it went. Okay. So anyway, after this match, John joined up with Strangler Lewis to be they called it his policeman, which meant if anybody wants to wrestle Strangler, they got to get through John first. So that was good for John because he could play to win, which is what he wanted, and I don't know if any got through John to get to this, the champ. And that John had realized, the trust is, they kind of blackball you if you don't play ball with them. So for 4 years, he was with that, and it gave him some good exposure. But finally, they promised him things. I don't know what. They said, we'll take care of you, whatever that means. But he got tired of that after 4 years and started just wrestling independently. And here, about in this time, there's Charlie Hansen. Farmer Burns was one of the biggies. He had a wrestling school. And this Charlie had been trained, and so they were horrified when John beat their main guy. And the town supported him. My dad can remember my dad was a railroader, and he can remember the trains, John coming in on the trains, and the people coming to greet him. So we got 1,000 people, and so they supported him. So then we're gonna jump to the Australian tour. Oh well, here we go. A lot of the newspapers, they said John was all business in the ring, but he did have a flair for a little showmanship, and this Siberian wolf looks a lot like a German Shepherd to me, but he was billed as a Siberian wolf, and John, big chain on him. He had a big match in Wichita that night. I can't remember who it was, but he walked the streets with the wolf, just, they did that for publicity. Okay, so here we're going to Australia. He got a good manager finally, middle back row, Al Haft of Columbus, Ohio. He broke with Slattery, and he had a couple other managers, but Mr. Haft was good. And there's John, and there's Clarence Eklund. And these are some Australian managers. He left Ravenna in June 29, took the train to Vancouver, Washington, or British Columbia, joined up with some of the other wrestlers. The ship was called the Origani. It's a new ship, built in 24, very fast and modern. They went to Hawaii first. John rode his wife. He was seasick. John made good use of the telegraph always. He was just, he communicated. 31 days to get there, stopped in Honolulu, Fiji Islands, New Zealand, and finally got to Australia. John won all his matches, 27, never lost a fall. Newspaper.com, I just discovered a year ago. For years I was frustrated, I couldn't get into those Australian newspapers. And when I finally did, it's break my neck looking into the computer. But I didn't bring a newspaper from 1929 Australia. It's very big, brittle, and so we got a lot of good souvenirs. John also joined the vaudeville shows while he was there and gave wrestling exhibition. The Australians loved him. We started getting all kinds of fan mail at his motel. And he, here, I'm getting ahead of myself. Just that trip. You know, I've been to Europe twice and nearly killed me on a jet. I mean, look at how far they went. And of course they could get up and walk around, but still. Here he is wrestling in Auckland, New Zealand. Big Jim Browning, this cracks me up. He wrestled Jim and beat Jim. But that's the toy wrestler. That isn't the guy that called him the toy. But anyway, he went to all these tracks. The Australians are really big on greyhound racing. You get English are big, and of course then they came to Australia. He bought him for like 210 guineas, which is equal to about 1,200 in American price. He was billed as the fastest greyhound in Australia. And he came home on the ship with John. I guess there was a terrible storm. The dogs were terrified. There was a couple other came with him. When he came home, he had two big, what they call them, those big trunks, steamer trunks, which he leaped off the train in. He had all kinds of goodies, which this interests me. Mother of pearl jewel boxes from Hawaii, black opals from Australia, baskets and silk scarves from Fiji Islands, amber necklaces, wool blankets from Australia, and he had these. He made 2 trips to Australia, but the second trip he had these black opals in this little pouch, and he gave opals out to some of the ladies around town, and one of my friends here, her mother got one, so. But this is an opal, my sister, I just learned 2 weeks ago. I'm not sure if this was the opal from the first trip in 29 or the 47, but my Aunt Liz gave it to Kathy. And I had a revelation. I thought black opals were black with just some of that fire in them. And they're like, my friend says, no. My sister sent this picture of this turquoise and I nearly died. I'm like, are you kidding? I thought they were black like an onyx. Well, anyway, that was one deal. And then I have to tell, I promised to tell the softer side to John. I'm not sure, the date's a year off. My Aunt Liz was 7, my mother was 3, and Jack was in between. And John put something in my mom's hand and says, take it to Mama. And it's an emerald with diamonds on each side. So that's how he gave her a ring. I'm not sure if it was from Australia or another trip, but it was within that time period. Okay, 29, he's home from Australia. It's funny how this turned up 6 months ago. A girlfriend of mine down the road, her husband's grandparents knew John and Grandma. And she gives me this, and I said, oh my God, can I take a picture? And she goes, no, I'm giving it to you. It was a fold out, and that's just Andrew. He had pretty white. And that's John there too. So I have that after all these years. This was, I believe, the same time, 29. So now we're moving on to, we'll get to the dogs later. John wrestled a lot in Columbus, Ohio, in this Buckeye Lake. This is my mother's, a little one in the middle, and Liz and Jack. And I guess they had rented a pretty big place, and my cousin just told me, well, I read it in Jeff's book, I guess they had some of the dogs with them, but it was a fun thing. And this is my mom on the left, the little girl, and John and Liz and Jack at Buckeye Lake. And the note says Grandma took the picture. And this is a bad picture, but I wanted to show you. He had a nice smile. A lot of his wrestling pictures, you know, they got to be gruff. You don't smile if you're a big tough wrestler. That's taken on the old back steps of the old home place. Okay, 31. They finally, this Al Haft, they were trying to break the big Eastern clique, so they formed kind of a Midwestern. The other one's called the National Wrestling Association. This is a Midwestern, and the pretty buckle there, which nobody seems to know where the buckle went. They made him their champion. Here's the pretty buckle up close. So then Joe Stecker, he was from Dodge, Nebraska. They were both Bohemians. They're both the same age. They're Nebraska farm-based boys. So that was the big hoopla, you know, the sports writers jump on this. And he met Stecker like 4 times. We don't have time to get in all of it. My cousin and I have discussed it. We think they're about a toss-up. One they couldn't throw each other, they stopped the match. One Joe won, one John won. But they were contemporaries. As you can see, Joe's a lot taller. And he outweighed John like 25 pounds, but he was the scissors king. You didn't want to let those legs get around you because that was his specialty. And here's Joe, the beautiful belt. When they'd have these big matches, they made it clear. His brother Tony was his manager. He said the belt isn't up for grabs. Even if you beat Joe, this belt was bought by the school children for Joe, and I don't blame him. So here's John with his cord. My husband said, can you imagine him roaring over the viaduct in that thing? Again, the showman. And I have a picture. It looked like bullet holes. It was really just bad things, but my Jeff sanitized it, but it looked like a gangster. I should have probably used that one, but anyway, I think the cord didn't last long. I guess he wrecked it or something. I think this was probably in Ohio. I'm not sure, but the big Angus bull, you can't see it very well. The girl, she's got real fancy boots on in the picture, and that's John in the cord. So more publicity pictures. Here's the pretty kennel. That's just Andrew. You can't see him very well. This kennel was still here when I was a kid. You know, we always lived close to John, and by 59, when I was probably second grader, you start knowing a little something. And there were still a few dogs, still a few greyhounds. The kennel was there. Years later, it had landrace hogs in it, like 1970. But it was a beautiful kennel. Here's my mother. Final Macabre was another Australian dog who did very well. I don't know. No, I don't think that's his trophy, but like it. Mom was 5. And here's John with Just Andrew. The Waterloo Cup was a big deal, and I did some research on the English greyhounds, and the Waterloo Cup was, you know, it just transferred on to America. And that's John with the dog. This I love. Gangster came in 32. He was another Australian dog. I don't know if John had ever seen him. I think they named him Gangster when he got here. There were 3 more he bought. But look at that smile. He's smiling. And he was born in 1930, so he was 6, which is, they said later, that's getting up there. But he ran, and another one of his trophies. And that dog trophy looks a lot like, they must have used the same dog. That's not the same trophy, but here he is. And I just ran across a picture, or a letter, just this week. I just keep digging, there's so much. John had written my mother a letter, and she responded, and she said, yes, Gang was such a sweet dog, so I gotta go find his letter. They were talking about Gangster. Unfortunately, here he is. He was 6.5 years old. You probably can't read it. Just more trophies for Gang. He died in he died in 1938. They think they had big meat grinders, if you can imagine, feeding 200 or 300 dogs. And they said he got a bone shard, the grinder wasn't working right, and 2 other dogs died. So they had a funeral for Gangster, the kids, and Al Half came out from Columbus for the funeral. And in Jeff's book, he says Just Andrew died like the same year. I haven't been able to find anything, but Mom remembers Just Andrew when he was older, in the house and sitting on a big chair. And if you wanted to sit down, you had to move Just Andrew, and then he'd protest, howl at him. So more stories of my mother. Didn't get enough stories. Don't know enough while they're alive to do something. Okay, so in 1934, John got the lease on the school land section right south of Ravenna, stone's throw from where I live now. He started building these cabins. This is a big cabin, and one of our people here, it's now on her family's property, and there were 5 little ones, and they were down in the trees, and of course the flood of 47 just was bad. But I can remember this, and it's still there when I was a kid. Liz thinks she moved it in 65 or so. So it's like 50 yards from where I live now. And my brother and cousin Brad, they were gonna camp down there one day and night. They were gonna live off the land. Brad was from Lincoln, and when he'd come out, he was just crazy happy. He called Ravenna Runny Town. So they were gonna live off the land, which was okay as long as Mom delivered sandwiches twice a day. So anyway, I'm with Mom, and it's getting dark, and the Ravenna Road where it is now, the gate was right there where it still is, and so she's walking down there to check on, see if the boys really want to spend the night down there. And my cousin Brad just told me a couple years ago, he said, yeah, we had Steve and I, the boys are like 13 and 14, my brother's a little older, and they're back to back like quail, and they got their guns out. And my mother must have called out, or they probably would have shot her, and I stayed up. But it was dark, and it's kind of spooky. You're going back down through those trees, probably 200 yards, but anyway, the boys were ready to come home. And I managed to keep my mouth shut when they got in the car. Now here's a little cabin that's, John moved to town later, and this is on Buell Avenue. And well preserved, Liz had it finished. It was actually by my parents' house for years. It must have been when John sold his farm that it came to the lot by my parents. Here's for scale, that's Jeff, my cousin. They had a little front room, a little stove, and then a little bedroom, just barely, the regular sized bed, and a little bit where you could get in the bed. But the big cabin had a nice living room, 1 bedroom, little kitchen with those little stoves, like a little camp stove.
It had a beautiful fireplace.
Yeah,
He had the brick shipped in from California.
Right. Did you hear her? She's a beautiful fireplace, and the bricks shipped in. John never did anything second rate. So it's sitting there on Liz's family property. And this one is still on Buell, new family. Here's another picture, jumping back. That's my mom in the background, and Mary Lee. But the little cabin, and Grandma's mother, she'd come out, and her and a couple of the little kids, they'd stay in the little cabin, just kind of a little camp out. And I can remember when it was at John's, and I think that's the one that then came to my folks. Okay, so now, let's see. Oh gosh, I got this a little out of order. Well, anyway, this robe was in the, remember wardrobes? cedar wardrobes out of the old place. It's in that upstairs bedroom, I'd peek in there, and there was that robe. For years, I'd peek in and it was still there, and I don't think I ever touched it. But the businessmen of Ravenna, I'm getting ahead of myself, when they made him world champion, they had that made for him, and you can't see it, but the colors were, Ravenna's colors are purple and gold, and the sash is purple. That's my Aunt Marilee. It's now in the museum in Waterloo, Iowa, where it should be. But first, I got to go back to 34 with the the cabins. There's also, John had these cool ideas. He started having guys build a sailboat down there in the trees. He said it was 100 feet long, and it was going to be like with a cabin on a sailboat. That was going to be the little soda fountain, and then the back was going to be an outdoor dance hall. Oh, how fun! And years later, in 2012, I ran into a Bachkara, last name Bachkara, and they told him who I was. He remembered the sailboat. He was like a 20-year-old when this is going on. He actually drew me a sketch, and it had the mast, and they were gonna put lights on it, and it sounded so cool, and it burned. John thought it was maybe rags, the painting rags. I always wondered kind of if it was arson, but I don't know. It was back in those trees. They never rebuilt it. He didn't have it insured yet. Then John started digging the lakes down there, Main 35, the big lake, and then there's two littler ones. But the big lake, he stocked with fish, and of course everybody wanted in there to fish, so I was kind of trying to keep people out, and John got fined for fishing in his lake one time. Game and Parks kind of oversaw that back then. But the big lake was 2 acres, 20 feet deep. And then what they called the Circle Lake, which was a racetrack, and it's still there. It's kind of, I'll show you pictures later. It's kind of like a moat. It's got the little island, and then the dogs ran around the oval. It was a 5/16 standard track. You had that built up, and then there was, the water, and then the dogs would run outside, and it's still there. And he started having races there. This is in the 30s, when nobody has any money and they're looking for something to do. So he had races and had brought in dogs from, other he also had a hatchery down there. Huge incubator. I can't even remember. That's the sign. It operated like 2 years, and they overloaded the switches and it burned. Had a little insurance on it. But anyway, down on the school land, he loved these game birds, and he would go. He spent a lot of time in Florida racing in the winter, and then he'd zip over to Cuba, and then he started going to South America to get these exotic birds. And Mom remembers the golden pheasant. He had black pheasants, white pheasants, Formosa teal, South American tree ducks, peacocks, and there were still a few peacocks when I was a kid. And people would always say, John, you heard this lady crying down there. And he'd laugh and say, that's those peacocks. And they are a weird sound, but I don't really think they sound like a lady crying. But that was just standard. And there were still a few when Steve and I, my brother, were kids. John would train by rowing around that little racetrack, and then he put an anvil on the boat for more resistance. He spent his whole life training. Okay, now we're up to May 37. Let's see, fall 36. The National Wrestling Association, they got like 20 guys. They're saying they're world champions. So now they're trying to pin this down. And so they say, okay, if you want to throw your hat in the ring, you have to post $1,000. So John does immediately. And their conventions, West Virginia or something. He posts and nothing happens. And finally, the next year, September 37, they have a big conference and they declare him the world champion. But there's caveat. You have to wrestle Everett Marshall or this Bronte Nagurski within 6 months. And so John says, sure, I'm ready to go. And so he issues the challenge through his people, and nothing happens. The other camp's dead silence. Nobody wants to wrestle John. And jumping back to the gold robe, when they announced this, the Ravenna businessmen bought this beautiful robe for him, and they presented it to him in Columbus, Ohio, before a big match. I don't think he ever wore the robe, but anyway. So we're kind of in limbo, and he's wrestling people to defend his title. June 38, he sees the racehorse War Admiral in Suffolk Down, Boston. He was back there with his dogs. Seabiscuit, remember Seabiscuit? The movie. He was supposed to run, and he scratched 15 minutes before the race. War Admiral won third. John thought the horses looked slow compared to the Greyhound. War Admiral was the 4th Triple Crown winner. So he saw War Admiral was related to Man of War. So there's another story about that. My sister and I are disagreeing that John saw Man of War, but we haven't figured that out yet. We both remember something about Man of War. Okay, so now we're September 38. John is stripped of his title and is given to Everett Marshall. John had been notified a day or so ago before, and he said he was surprised they gave it to Marshall, as he had lost 3 matches of last year. And John's dethroning causes an uproar in the wrestling field. The Canadians withdrew. Several of our states said, we're not sending our commissioners. This is wrong. This guy John hasn't lost a match in years, and they gave it to Everett Marshall. So, of course, John acted like he wasn't disappointed, but I can't imagine him not being, because he pursued this for 20 years. Okay. September of that year, he gets a letter from the Australians. They want to honor Gangster, and they want him to send a lot of pictures and newspaper articles. And then Gangster dies a month later. So I don't know if they did. I've never seen the printout. It would have been Australian. So then in late October, after the National Wrestling has dethroned him, now the Midwest Wrestling Association says, you're our champ. And that their convention was in Louisville, Kentucky. So John continues to wrestle. Finally, Everett Marshall comes to life. He wrestles John, and Marshall is just like a maniac, just hugging, slugging and hitting, and I can't remember what happened, if they stopped the fight or what, but he delayed. It was just one of these icky deals. This is another, Pacific Dream is another Australian dog. Often John's dogs would, this is the trophy over here. I don't know who George Morris is. I've tried to find out. It was an Omaha deal. But often John's dogs would be 3 deep. They were running against each other. You know, they dominated these bloodlines were so good. 47, John goes back to Australia. Dogs are very expensive, and he doesn't get many. He does get some wrestling exhibitions. Aussies still remember him and revere him and wine and dine him. Brings more opals back, and continues wrestling. He wrestled a lot in Columbus, Ohio. Here's a close-up of this trophy over here. Often those greyhounds had their bones showing, their ribs showing, but I guess that's just the way they were. They were just, this is the Waterloo plate. Mom told me, take care of that, it's silver. And it is, because it tarnished. I bought silver polish the other day. I didn't know if they still made silver polish. And here's the Waterloo. And I just found, just the other day, Aunt Marilee, the Moradig, she tried to categorize these dogs, what they won, and here it is, who won this Waterloo they had the Waterloo Cup, and this is the Waterloo Plate, and who was it? It was split between two of John's dogs, and I can't remember where it is. So, okay, 47. John kept wrestling. He was getting pretty old. By 47, he's 53 years old. And this postcard, I'm not sure, but you know, it was the 30s. I don't know, the dogs. Some of these artists did a really good rendition of his face. Here we are back on the school land with the birds he loved, and that's the north side of the big lake. This is the same slide. Here he is on the Circle Lake on a bike training. Here, I love this one. Here's Sing Sing the Giant Pole. And this other little guy, that's, remember Zibby? He had a brother, Stanislav, and this is Stan, who John wrestled later, and I have a picture of when they're older. But look at that guy, and I guess he weighed 300 pounds, and John took care of him. Here he is with Jesse Owens, 36th Lambert track. Jesse was, you know, from Ohio, and John was back there a lot, and I love this picture. It's not a very good one, but there were the three older kids, and then we had a 5.5-year gap, and then we had the little stair steps. That's little Steve on the left, Cassie, Mick, and Marilee. Here's Jack. Uncle Jack played football. And I just found the date on this. It was September 46, and John was impressed by how much leg wrapping they had in the training room. This is a postcard he sent my mom. She was in nurses training up in Chicago, and he said, write me in Columbus. He was wrestling there, but the dogs, they always wore, you can't really see it, they wore muzzles. I have an old muzzle there. It was wire. Later they had softer ones. This is a postcard to Mom. She's in Chicago. And here's Jim Londas. He wrote, he wrestled with earlier. They wrestled several times, but I just wanted to show you a picture of John smiling. He had nice teeth, and Jim was a good-looking guy too. Once again, the artist did a pretty good job. This is in 1948. Of course, he's showing younger, but there's the big tiger. And this is John in the center. The Action newspaper. Wrestled for polio. That Native American, I don't know if that's Bear. He wrestled Bear Claws somebody several times. I'm not sure how old he was here. I asked Adarine one time how old do you guys think he is here? 55?
60?
Yeah, I mean, the hat, they wore those kind of hats in the early 50s too, didn't they? I hate it when there aren't dates, but there isn't a date on it. Here he is in 57, he's inducted in Nebraska Hall of Fame. That's his daughter, Marilee. And here he is. Okay, now we're up to, how are we doing on, yeah, I'm getting close. His last match, I was 7 in Ravenna in our old high school. We called it the White School. He wrestled a big policeman, a young guy, and the guy later said he was amazed how, because John's 65 years old now, said I was amazed how agile he was for a man of his age, and it was a benefit for our new medical building down there, and they present him with the gold watch. That's what he's looking at. And what I remember about wrestling matches, not really much about John. I remember Dick the Bruiser. He was wrestling Uncle Jack, and Dick came out into the audience and went right through the aisle, and they're jeering him and all that stuff. So that's, I wish I could remember more about John wrestling, but I just can't. I don't know why, I was pretty young. So here's my sister Kathy, and another She was born in October 6th, since it's her next Christmas. Anyway, I have to tell you about, this is another with a softer side. She, I don't know if any of you remember the Lady Esther cold cream. It was in these big jugs and it was for your face, and Mom had one. Kathy's like 2.5 and she thinks it's shampoo. And so she smears this all in her head, and Mom is in the process of rushing this out, and Kathy's crying and saying, shampoo, shampoo. And the accent was on the poo. And the doorbell rings in the middle of this melee, and it's John. And I go to the door, and he says, what's going on? And I told him. So he comes out to the kitchen and says to Mom, don't be mad at the little girl. She didn't know. And so they had a special, and I just found this a couple weeks ago and sent it to my sister. That's Grandma there behind. And Kathy has really got his attention. And I said, what were you telling him? We don't know, but he would take her north of Ravenna. Before the roundabouts of today, there was like a mile north and the little road kind of curves off, and then you can go around behind in the highway. Well, he'd take her out there and they called it the merry-go-round, and he'd spin around. So they had a bond. This is out at the old farm. 64 gangsters inducted in the Hall of Fame in Abilene, Kansas. John was able to go. Grandma dies, abnormal aneurysm. Back then they tried to take the skin off the leg and somehow repair that. Was real new then, and it was a 10-hour surgery. She developed glaucoma. You can see her little eyes. I put the drops in. This is her youngest boy, Steve, shortly before she died. And last time I saw her was Christmas Eve, 65. She was with her boy, Mick, and they're walking out into a beautiful falling snow. And she had the surgery the next week. 1970, somebody gave us this, and that's a real good, like I said, some of these artists really do a good rendition of his face. Here we are. I gave John his first great grandchild. Teddy was born in 71, and John would cruise around in his 71 or 2 Cadillac, just inch an hour, literally, almost. So there he is with a cad, and he had hip surgery. One of the ladies here that took care of him in the hospital with a hip surgery, and that's Liz, and in the gold Cadillac. Here he is on his exercise bike with the poster behind him. And so then Nick Moffat, local man, class of what, 64 or something like that, from Ravenna. Wonderful sculpture. He wants to do a sculpture, John. First John says, no. And finally Nick says, well, you know my dad and my grandpa. Oh, well, okay. So he got a fun grant from the Arts Council, and then the Ravenna people put in a lot. The chamber was big instigators, and people started writing in, sending money. But the terms were Nick had to do it publicly so people could come and watch. So they'd come and watch. Here's John, no pressure. And he goes, Nick told us that in person. My cousin and I went to see him a couple of years ago, or 10 years ago. He's a wonderful sculptor. John said, well, my chest isn't big enough, so he put some more mud on. And then when John would leave, he'd scrape it out. The statue's not full. It's kind of flat. You know, you got the money thing. It's a bronze. So this is the summer of 77. This was in the World Herald. He was having dinner with his 2 oldest children. Liz was now living in John's house, and Uncle Jack had come up the night before, and they were having a beautiful breakfast, and he just falls off the chair. And Liz is an RN. She tried to revive him, but he was gone. But a good death. What's better? Dying with your kids. His mind was good. 8 grandkids. I don't know why the little one was on the front, but he was. Here's Nick. 2 months later, the statue's done. He's unveiling the statue. We had the lieutenant governor there over Memorial Day. There's the family. This is my mom, Aunt Cassie, Marilee, Steve, Liz, Mick and Jack with the statue. And that's baby Steve, he's the youngest one. In '78, John was inducted in Greyhound Hall of Fame, and I went in Abilene, my sister and 4 or 5 of us were down there. I got one of my famous migraines, nearly ruined it. This is my mother with that, at that time with John's display. Mom hadn't been there since 38 when she had a dog one down there. And get this, I got on the Greyhound Hall of Fame 2 years ago. They have a division for pioneers. Guess who isn't there? I'm in the P's, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Steve was the first one that had 2 dogs inducted. So that's a battle I'm gonna have to fight when I get time. Here's the statue. Stood at the bank corner for 44 years. There's their grave. I took a picture of that. John's statue was taken down in, he's there 44 years, June 2002. They had a curbing project. So it was taken down, and after 28 months, we got it, the Historical Society. It needed a new base. The base had crumbled. They took the base off. So he's now at the Historical Society waiting for a new base. And here's the, down on the school land, Grandma had a little milking barn there, and I was there with her in the late 50s when we'd milk the cows. I should say she milked and I watched. It's still there. This is real special to me, this school land. Here's the Circle Lake. The dogs ran around the outer, and now there's, wood ducks. And I think there's still some original wire there. I bird watched down there since '69. Bluebird houses, luckily I've always got permission from the lessees. So we're flashing back. Here's the lake. This is the right-hand side where the new dirt was. And here's the Circle Lake, the big lake, I'm sorry. And this would have been where John was standing. This is the north side looking south. You can't see it. There's a little island down in there, which is perfect for the Canada geese, because nothing can get them unless a coyote really wants to swim. Here's John. I forgot to say, John loved the Canada geese. And we didn't always have so many up here. In 1970, when I was bird watching, I heard these geese down there, and it was a big deal for me. Now they're all over, but. So, that's it, my friend Judy, and all the pictures I took, I liked hers the best in 21. So that's it, folks. Thank you for your attention. Like I said, my cousin wrote the book in 2013. I didn't bring one. He's only got 4 left. Jack Pesek at Hotmail if anybody wants one. So, any questions?
When was the farm? Along Highway 2?
Yeah, it's, where the clinic, Ravenna vet clinic, it's just west. They were very close to town.
Okay.
The co-op, the 4 corners, they're only 3/4 of a
And then
mile.
how far was Circle Lake off of that road?
Nah, a stone's throw. You
So
can,
you can see it from.
yeah, he dug a little lake right by the road, and then it's right over there.
Okay. And one more question.
Mhm.
Where was the greyhounds?
Well, he had them at the home place, although he did have some down there on the school land too. They were great big, they had those like 7-foot fences, wire fences.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
You're
thank you,
welcome.
Valerie, so much for coming and
You're
telling us
welcome.
about
Thanks
John.
for having me.